The Mozambique national football team, popularly known as Os Mambas, represents Mozambique in association football and is controlled by the Federação Moçambicana de Futebol, the governing body for football in Mozambique. Mozambique have never qualified for a FIFA World Cup, but they have qualified for 4 Africa Cup of Nations in 1986, 1996, 1998 and most recently the 2010 Africa Cup of Nations in Angola, being eliminated in the first round in all 4. Mozambique are currently ranked 116th in the FIFA World Rankings, with their highest ever ranking of 66th in November 1996. Mozambique's home ground is Estádio do Zimpeto in the capital city Maputo, and can hold 45,000 spectators. The team's current head coach is the former international João Chissano, who has been in charge since the June of 2013. History. First game Mozambique played its first match against Tanzania in 1977, losing the match 2-1. They first qualified for the Africa Cup of Nations in 1986, but were knocked out in the first round. Mozambique never qualified for another 10 years until 1996. Again being knocked out in the first round of the tournament. 1986 African Nations Cup Mozambique qualified for its first Africa Cup of Nations in 1986, held in Egypt, beating Mauritius 3-0 in the preliminary round. In the first round of qualifying, Mozambique played Malawi, drawing both legs of the match. They eventually won 6-5 on penalties. In the second round of qualifying they played Libya, losing the first leg 2-1. They won the second leg 2-1 and then went on to win the match 4-3 on penalties, qualifying for the tournament. Mozambique were placed in Group A along with Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire and hosts Egypt. They lost all their games 3-0, 2-0 and 2-0, not scoring a single goal. Egypt went on to win the tournament on home soil. 1996 African Cup of Nations Mozambique had to wait 10 years to qualify for another Africa Cup of Nations, as they qualified for the 1996 tournament in South Africa. They were placed in Group D along with Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana and Tunisia. Mozambique played their first game against Tunisia in Port Elizabeth, drawing 1-1 with Tico scoring in the 4th minute. They then went on to lose 1-0 to Cote d'Ivoire and 2-0 to Ghana, thus eliminating them from the tournament. 1998 African Cup of Nations 2 years later, Mozambique qualified for their third Africa Cup of Nations held in Burkina Faso. They were again placed in Group D along with Morocco, Egypt and Zambia. Mozambique lost their first game against eventual tournament winners Egypt 2-0, both goals coming from João Chissano. In their second game they again lost to Morocco 3-0, therefore eliminating them from the tournament with one game still remaining. In their last game against Zambia, they drew 1-1, their first goal of the tournament. This would prove to be their last African Cup of Nations game for 12 years. 2010 FIFA World Cup qualification Mozambique entered the 2010 FIFA World Cup qualification in the second round, and were placed in Group 7 with Botswana, Madagascar and African football giants Cote d'Ivoire. They made a terrible start to qualifying, losing to Cote d'Ivoire and Minnows Botswana 1-0 and 2-1, and drawing 1-1 with Madagascar. Mozambique then went on to beat Madagascar 3-0 in Antananarivo with goals coming from Tico, Carlitos and Dominguez. They then drew 1-1 with Cote d'Ivoire and beat Botswana 1-0 and Gaborone to qualify for the third round. Mozambique were one of the lowest seeded teams in the third round, and were placed in Group B with Nigeria, Tunisia and Kenya. They went on to draw their first game against giants Nigeria 0-0 in Maputo. They then went on to lose their next 2 games against Tunisia and Kenya 2-0 and 2-1, now making it a struggle to qualify for their first FIFA World Cup. In the next game, they beat Kenya 1-0 with Tico scoring, but then a loss to Nigeria eliminated them from qualifying. In the last game they beat Tunisia 1-0 in a surprising victory that stopped Tunisia from qualifying. Despite not qualifying for the World Cup, they still qualified for the 2010 African Cup of Nations in Angola. 2010 African Cup of Nations after a 12-year absence from African Cup of Nations football, Mozambique were placed in Group C with Egypt, Nigeria and Benin. In their first game, he played Benin Bingana, drawing 2-2 after being 2-0 down, with goals coming from Miro and Fumo. They then went on to lose 2-0 to eventual tournament winners Egypt and 3-0 to Nigeria, thus eliminating them from the tournament. After the tournament, all-time top scorer and captain Tiko Tiko retired from international football. 2012 African Cup of Nations Mozambique were drawn in Group C for 2012 Africa Cup of Nations qualifying along with Libya, Zambia and Comoros. They drew 0-0 with Libya in their first game and followed it up with 1-0 win away to the Comoros. But two straight losses of 2-0 and 3-0 to Zambia left the Black Mambas' qualification hopes in tatters. Failure to qualify was confirmed with a third straight defeat in a 1-0 away loss to Libya. They would finish their campaign with a moral-restoring 3-0 home drubbing of the Comoros. 2013 African Cup of Nations for the 2013 edition of the African Cup of Nations, Mozambique was drawn against Tanzania in the first round of qualifying. After a 2-2 aggregate draw over two legs, they defeated Tanzania 7-6 in the ensuing penalty shootout, recovering from missing their first two penalties. With their victory, Mozambique progressed to the second round of qualifying, where they will be drawn from Pot 2, which houses teams ranked 16th-30th. 2014 FIFA World Cup Mozambique entered the 2014 FIFA World Cup CAF qualification process in the first round. For the first round they were seeded in Pot 1 and were drawn against the Comoros. They won both legs of the tie, opening with a hard-fought 1-0 away win before comprehensively outclassing the Islanders 4-1 in the home leg. With the win, they secured their passage to the second round, where they were seeded in Pot 4 for the draw. Mozambique were drawn in Group G, along with African powerhouse Egypt, Southern Africa neighbours Zimbabwe and West Africans Guinea. They opened their group campaign with a 2-0 away loss to group favourites Egypt before returning home and earning a point against Zimbabwe in a goalless draw. They then drew with Guinea, before a disappointing 6-1 loss to Guinea in the return fixture that eliminated them from the competition. World Cup record. African Nations Cup record. Recent results. Players. Current squad. The following players were called up for 2015 Africa Cup of Nations qualifying matches against Tanzania on July 20, 2014. Caps and goals as of July 20, 2014. Recent call-ups. The following players have also been called up to the Mozambique squad within the last 12 months. Previous squads. Africa Cup of Nations, 1986 African Cup of Nations squads. Euro Mozambique, 1996 African Cup of Nations squads. Euro Mozambique, 1998 African Cup of Nations squads. Euro Mozambique, 2010 Africa Cup of Nations squads. Euro Mozambique. References. External links: Fedra Picavolt #Omo section Ambicana de Futebol, Mozambique at FIFA.com, Mozambique at CAF Online.